Hello, people of grace. For our Pastoral Connect this week, we're looking at Malachi chapter 2, verse 5. Just as a bit of review, in Malachi's day, the public institutions had kind of fallen apart. There was really no confidence in them. There's a lot of similarities between Malachi and the United States today in that regard, when you look at people's confidence in public institutions. But the kingship had fallen apart. There was no king. The school of the prophets was winding down. There were false prophets. Malachi is the last of the writing prophets. All that was left was the institution of the priesthood, and the priests were corrupt. But we, as followers of Christ, are called to be priests. And Peter makes that very clear, that we are a royal priesthood, a chosen nation. And so we can't really look around at public institutions and excuse our lack of confidence in them as a reason not to step up ourselves. And when you talk about being priest, one of the big ideas behind a priest is that a priest is a mediator. A priest mediates between parties in conflict, specifically between God and humanity. But priests were also kind of counselors, and so helping people mediate disputes between each other, or helping an unclean person mediate the journey from being unclean and outside the camp to being clean and part of the community. So priests did a lot of mediating. And in Malachi chapter 2, verse 5, God talks about the priesthood covenant that he'd originally set up with Levi. And then we're not under that Levitical priesthood today. There's some things about that covenant that God says to Levi that I think still apply to us today. So first, a covenant. A covenant can be a treaty, it can be a marriage contract, or even a pledge. And in Malachi 2:5, I think it's more a pledge, where God says, my covenant with him, with Levi, was one of life and peace, and I gave them to him. So I think God made a pledge to Levi and set up this mediating priesthood. God has made a pledge to us. He's made a covenant with us. And it is a pledge of life and peace. This idea of life is the same thing that John's talking about in the Gospel of John chapter 1. That is saying, in the Word was life, and that life was a light to humanity. The focus here is not really so much on physical life as the life of the soul, and that this life is a light to other people. So priests should be very much a source of light and life and hope and faith and love, to lift up people's souls, because it's a pledge of life and then a pledge of peace, shalom, which means reconciliation, but also has this idea of just well-being, spiritual, emotional health, integration. And so priests need to be emotionally healthy people that are more on the journey of being inwardly reconciled and at peace, so we can then show peace to the world. That's a pledge we need to take. And ultimately, we don't lose hope when we remember that this pledge or this covenant is a gift. God said, I made a pledge of life and peace, and I gave it to him, to Levi. So first and foremost, the priest has to really be stepping out in faith and holding on to and fighting for that sense of the gift that God has given us to even be serving as priests, that it is a high calling and a privilege and a gift. And when we cultivate that and we come from a place of life and peace, we're then able to do that mediating work. And mediation is hard. I often say that the mediator has to be willing to be hated by both sides. You can't really be partial. And the willingness to be hated by both sides means that the mediator, if they're going to do their work well, has to absorb a lot of stuff, yet stay in this place of life and peace. That's a challenge. But then again, when you look at when God embodied himself, the second person of the Trinity, the Word, in Jesus Christ, Look at what Jesus had to absorb within himself to give us life and peace. And when we look to him and his example, instead of getting too hung up on what's going on around us, it does reorient us to the gift of life and peace that is ours as priests of God through Jesus Christ. And life and peace recognized as a gift and celebrated as a gift are encouraging. So be encouraged.